Welcome to episode 7 of Two Dumb White Guys. I am Paul Davidson.
And I am Scott Norman.
And today we're going back to the OG roots of Two Dumb White Guys, a.k.a. helping Mr. Davidson out with his homework. And Mr. Scott Norman has graciously volunteered for me to do this thing called a reader profile on him, specifically a reader profile interview in which I interview him about his reading habits, and then I have him do some reading so I could just kind of gauge of where he's at on the reading spectrum. Now, spectrum's a kind of a bad thing, but trying to coach him to tell him how to become a better reader. And that's what this thing is. It's to help people become better at what they do. It's not necessarily saying that you're a bad reader if you're going through this, by no means. It's saying, here's what we can do to make you better.
I is bad reader.
Hey, as long as you're communicatively effective. That's a topic for our next possible episode if we continue with Mr. Davidson does his homework.
I think we talked about that a little bit on our first episode.
Yes, with the Dr. April Baker Bell, we kind of talked about that a little bit. I'm getting a heavy dose of that currently in one of my classes, and I have a project that we might talk about for the next episode, but that's not for this episode. Instead we're focusing on the reader profile. So, here's the deal about reading. There's kind of three things when it comes to reading. You have semantic, which is making sense of the text. Then you have syntactic, which is the grammar structure and the language system that's associated with it. And then you have graphophonic, and that's the visual and decoding aspects of the written language.
That's also the most fun to say.
Yes, and basically anytime someone struggles at reading or is weak at reading, they're usually weak in one of those three areas. And so this interview is to help me kind of figure out which of the areas someone would be weak in. Now, of course, you have a bachelor's degree in education, and so you have proven quite competent in reading.
What are you talking about? I didn't have to read anything to be a history teacher.
But we're going to try this. And so this is this is an interview, and there's different versions of the interview. There is an 18 question one and a 10 question one, and a lot of the 10 question ones overlap with the 18, so we're just going to go full bore with the 18 question one. And the point of the interview is supposed to be a conversation, because this is another one of those weird things where like people try to mystify teaching instead of like being outright and being like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is the purpose of this. And so if I ask you to do this, I'm not trying to say that you're a bad reader, by no means. I'm trying to help you become better, and if you want to play along, you can answer these questions along. But the purpose of this is to be a conversation. That way the child or the pupil is relaxed and more open with their responses. All right, so
I just like throwing in ASMR for my seniors. They're addicted apparently.
All right, so Mr. Norman, what do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Like disc golf. I do read, although recently I've been cheating and I've been doing audiobooks.
That's not cheating, by the way. That's still perfectly acceptable way of reading. So you do disc golf. What else are you interested in?
Jesus and the outdoors.
Jesus and the outdoors. You were a Boy Scout. I keep forgetting that.
Yes, that might have clued in most of those answers.
You kind of answered this in the first question, but how do you feel about reading?
I enjoy reading. I used to, when I was a child, I read a ton. My grandparents still talk about the fact that whenever I went on trips with them, whenever they woke up in the morning, they would find me hidden behind the curtain in the hotel room so that I could get the light from outside without letting it in.
Else
yeah.
All right. So what do you read? So what are the different genres or different specific things that you read?
Man, recently I have been sticking almost purely to nonfiction. A lot of course, go figure, a lot of history, a lot of biographies.
Well, that's still a pretty broad spectrum. Like, what are some like specific histories that you're reading?
All right, so just got done with 1493, which we drew heavily from. Actually, we drew heavily from 1491 in our "What Happened to the Native Americans" episode. So you can go back there and listen if you guys are listeners there. But recently, I've started rereading a book called "The Explicit Gospel" by Matt Chandler. As you can tell, that's definitely kind of theological / practical book. Yeah. I think those are my most recent. Okay,
so those are your recent ones. But once again, like, what are like some other genres of history that you'll go into? You pointed on the pre-colonial era. Like anything, what else What else era-wise do you like to look into?
Okay, so I went on a streak recently where I went through all of the big kind of like tech boom people. I say all of them. I went through several of them. So I read The Jobs, and once again, a lot of these reading, I'm actually listening on Audible, but the Jobs biography that's kind of considered the authoritative Jobs biography.
That's
Bezos.
the Walter Isaacson one?
Yes. And then I also did his book called The Innovators, which is basically small profiles of the people who touched the ideation of the computer and then the internet. Fun fact, we give him a lot of hate, but Al Gore did have a huge hand in the creation of the internet. But anyway, so...
He had a hand. He
did not invent it, yes.
He invented it. He helped it, but he did not necessarily invent it.
Correct.
So you keep on going back to audiobooks, and it's perfectly fine to read audiobooks. It is a form of reading. It's
Yes.
a form of interacting with it, because it's all reading is thinking. Where writing is also thinking. Reading is interacting with someone else's thoughts. Where writing is expressing your own thoughts. What about actual hands-on reading? Do you do you do it on a daily basis?
Yes.
What are some of those daily basis things?
Okay, so daily basis things, Bible, read it all the time, and you want to talk about a great work there. Anyway, but so a lot of different areas there in the Bible that I'll read. I'm trying to think of other books.
It doesn't necessarily even have to be books. It's in your day-to-day life.
Oh, gosh.
How do you encounter reading?
Okay, if we're going just encountering reading anywhere, yeah, I have been putting this all on books. Oh, of course, Twitter, ESPN. CNN. Fake news. Wrong. But,
You get emails, too. You get emails that you have to deal with.
Those are quick reads, usually.
You mentioned a lot of websites, not necessarily because we moved to kind of past newspapers, but you mentioned news gathering websites such as and social media such as Twitter. What about would you consider grading students' work? Is that reading for you?
Yeah, actually. So over the last weekend, towards the end of our everyone was sick for a week break. Then I read something like 60 essays. That was a lot of reading.
And I know that's kind of isolated towards a teacher per se, but
yes.
You do point out that there is a lot of reading that you have to do throughout.
Yes.
Reading pervades all aspects of our life.
That is true. And yeah, you're forcing me to rethink the reading profile here. Is that yes, I do read all the time, even if it's not a book, I am actively reading. I'm one of those guys that if I'm just sitting there eating breakfast, I read the entire cereal box just because I have to.
All right, so you talked about your grandparents earlier, but what about your parents? Did your parents read to you when you were a child?
Yes. So so for those of you podcast listeners who are unaware, I am currently waiting for the due date of my child in May, and my father has already started telling me, "Oh, you need to be reading to him. He can hear already," and that's true. He can hear already. And so I was literally read to before, during, and after I was born. Well, I don't know about during, but.
I would applaud your father's attempts at literacy, or it'd be even more impressive if it was your mother that was reading to you while you were being born. Then that woman would be like a saint of literature.
Oh gosh, no. So I did, yeah. He read to us. He used to basically he would read and then he would tell us stories based on things. So he'd create his own characters out of ancient Nordic myth and things like that. But yeah, lots of reading, and then I began reading very young as well.
And then not only that, this is something I'm not supposed to do, which is a leading question, kind of guide you towards a particular area. I'm not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be more of a natural conversation. But you mentioned, a lot of our students might not know, you were homeschooled for a very long time.
I was, for an extended period of time. So I was homeschooled for, I think, 7 years, if I did my math right there. Yeah, I went through first grade, and then I didn't come back to a public school until 10th grade. So during that time, tons of reading.
So, what do you see whenever you lived with your parents? What did you see your parents reading for themselves? So, what did you see them do?
Well, once again, reading the Bible or reading devotionals, things like that. But also, my dad is just as nerdy about social studies as I am. He's probably where I picked it up from, and so he would be reading all of these books that when I was younger I would look at and be like, how can you read that? And they were very similar probably to things like 1491 and 1493 or biographies.
Well, why did you think that?
I think just kind of the general perception is if there's not a cool picture on the front. And
so you're judging a book by its cover.
I was literally, yes. And its width. The size of the words and the thickness of the book. And so when you're younger and you're like, tiny little words, gigantic fat book, the tendency is to think, oh yeah, that's not going to be interesting. Like that will bore me to death. So there was a lot of that for sure, where I was judging the book by its cover, and then, turns out they were all sitting on the shelf in our family library, and I would just start digging through them to the point that I guess this is like one of those, weird addictions almost. I read large portions just straight out of the encyclopedia. Like I'd be like, I'm going to read S today. And I would just read it because it was entertaining.
It's kind of similar to the Wikipedia holes people will now go down,
yes,
I imagine.
Very similar.
All right. I kind of mixed up the questions, but that's fine because this is supposed to be a conversation. It's not supposed to be me going through a check mark of questions. What do you think your parents do when they get to a word that they don't know?
What do my parents...
Keep in mind, I'm supposed to be doing this towards...
Yes. My father probably either looks it up or makes up a definition.
What do you mean by makes up?
Well, so I was kind of going the humorous route, literally, as he was reading us stuff. If there was something, he would kind of do the classic, like, oh, well, it means this, and it may have. He correctly guessed most of them, but a lot of times he would just make stuff up if we were asking, so that would force us to look it up.
How do you think he was able to come up with those on-the-spot definitions?
Voracious reader. So being able to identify context clues, and you can pretty much read a text and not know every fourth or fifth word and still know exactly what that text said for the most part, as far as big ideas go.
Okay. How did you learn to read? Like, try to remember back. How did you learn to read?
A lot of it, I believe, was simply being read to and then wanting to read those things for myself, because I have a memory. Now, I don't think this is a fabricated memory, of sitting there in first grade, and we were all sitting in a circle and reading one of those, literal see, spot, run kind of books, and just sitting there because I didn't understand that this was learning to read. I already knew how to read a book like that. And so I got to first grade, and I'm sitting there just like, oh gosh, this is so boring. Because I'm like, I know I'm 5 pages ahead of everyone. Like, why is this exciting? And that wasn't because I was any more intelligent than the kids I was around. It was because my parents just exposed me so heavily to reading and to books that I was bored, because I was analyzing the plot of See Spot Run instead of focused on learning the words.
Looking at the syntactic or graphophonic meanings of the words, you were more looking at the semantic meanings of the words.
Sure.
Well, those are the definitions. Syntactics is the grammar structure and language structure, and graphophonic is the visual and decoding aspects of writing, and then semantic is what you were doing as decoding. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. So you already kind of answered my question. I was going to ask you about how did teachers teach you to read, but what did your parents do to help you learn how to read?
Yeah, and there is distinctly some overlap there. Once again, being homeschooled, but. My parents, to help me learn how to read, not to be repetitive, but did a lot of reading themselves, did a lot of just kind of introducing me to books. We would kind of browse through, there's like Scholastic or whatever that, they've got all those books in there. And my mother would always allow us to pick out like 2 or 3 books or book series, and then she would just order them. And as soon as we got done reading all of the ones we had ordered, we could order some more. And so she did a good job of kind of being like, well, maybe not that one yet. Let's do this one because that's more on your level. But then allowing us to kind of level up so that we were reading more difficult texts relatively quickly because we were just getting the experience.
Okay. So this is another one of those ones, like, keep in mind, this would be a student. What does your teacher this year do to help you learn to read or help you to learn to read better? So instead of that particular question, like in college, how did reading kind of start to change whenever you went to college?
Reading when I got to college, if I'm going to be completely honest, became a lot more skim for content type reading, where you're not reading necessarily purely for enjoyment. You're reading for knowledge. You're reading for information.
But still, you're reading for a purpose, right?
Yeah, you have a purpose, and that purpose is I have to have 20 sources for this 15-page essay, and so I'm going to, I'm doing air quotes that you can't see, read this book, and I might not know if you say, hey, do you remember this specific thing? But I'll be able to give you the overarching idea of the book and pull out examples to support that. So I guess that's really how it changed, and that was when I began also to shift from kind of the, not fairy tales, what am I looking for? Fiction, just fiction, and reading about, a bunch of mice and cats that are pirates and British soldiers, and I don't remember the name, Cat of the Nine Lives, I think, or Cat of the Nine Tails, something like that. But switching over to things that actually had real, depth to them.
So you mentioned an annotated, I imagine you had to do an annotated bibliography?
I did, yes,
so doing
several.
something like that, that was a type of activity that you had to do to learn, that taught you how to read a little bit better.
Yeah, and even did some fun, now I'm having a brain fart on what they're called. Where you go through and look at a particular event and then read all of the different styles of literature, through the years on that one event. It was from historiography.
Yes. It's not a. Was
that Curtis?
Yeah, it was Curtis. It's not It's not an annotated bibliography, but it is that well-roundedness where you kind of get to see all of the different aspects of that particular event that occurred. You get to see the context of it. I guess it's contextual reading, maybe.
Yeah, I'll have to remember. At some point, I'll remember it in some other podcast and just randomly blurt out what those things were called.
But yeah, so you pointed out these activities that you did that helped level you up to the higher level reading, which you went from necessarily just decoding the text and looking for meaning, and then just really starting to strip the text for meaning that you're looking for, instead of having to build it slowly and surely. You now can cut through it with a machete and get to what you're needing to get to. All right. Who usually chooses what you read in school?
So when I was in school, it was usually teachers for the in-school part, and then, like I said, I had free reign at home, and we had a pretty large library.
What should you prefer? What's the difference between the two?
Okay, so the difference between the two for me was a lot of style, what I would read. So once again, when I was at home, I would be reading history, or I read things like The Lord of the Rings and stuff like that when I was in high school. And then at school, I was forced to read books. I don't even know if I can name drop some of the books that I was forced to read in high school, because they were beyond R-rated foreign literature. And I was in this program called the International Baccalaureate Program where you could get away with that. But so yeah, I was reading things that were just very trippy, very what's it called? Magical realism combined with.
You read Chocolate for Water.
Like Water for Chocolate.
Like Water for
was
Chocolate.
One of them. Yeah.
That, all of a sudden, as soon as you mentioned all of that, okay, this makes sense.
The burning
But
barn.
would you say that at least reading like that, did that possibly broaden your horizons? Allow you to get out of your comfort zone, allow you to. Do you feel like you gained something from pushing yourself that way?
So I would say that from that, what I gained is, we were just in class today talking about classical conditioning and various types of conditioning. And I accidentally probably generalized Latin American literature. No offense, Latin American literature, but my experience with Latin American literature was scarring.
Well, you had a scarring experience, but there are some really you'd like Don Quixote.
Yeah, okay. Don Quixote is different. It's a different vibe for sure than the magical realism of Water for Chocolate.
There was another one that I watched a YouTube video here recently about. It was about this one family that went back thousands of years, and it just followed the bloodline of this one family that owned this plantation. I'm
trying to remember. There was another one that actually I did like. And it was a murder mystery, but it was written out of order. It was so the chapters weren't in order as you went, and so it was this really confusing thing, but it was Latin American literature, and it's still sitting on my shelf, because unlike the other one that I pitched, I kept that one, and I cannot remember the name of it. So any of you who are Latin American literature buffs, it's an out of order murder novel. Anyway, but that was interesting to me. That one actually struck me as interesting.
Do you like to choose what you read?
I do. Every now and then I like recommendation. If people are like, man, this is really good, or this really helped me understand X or Y, then I'll go with recommendations. In fact, I don't know how I ended up reading 1491. My dad might have actually recommended that to me. He might have bought that for me.
It was a gift. He just bought it and was like, read this.
Yeah, and
I want to talk about this with somebody. You have to read it.
I, of course, cheated. Okay, this isn't cheating. So people listening at home, I am not calling Audible bad. I listen to Audible all the time. Most of the reading I've done recently in book form has been on Audible. But I have both physical books sitting at home, and I listen to them.
Well, here's the thing. Reading is an interaction with the ideas in the text. So if you're listening to it, that's still you interacting with the ideas. As long as you're thinking about the ideas that were being echoed through the text, through the spoken word, then that's perfectly fine.
It's also how I stay awake on my commute.
All right, so why do people read?
Either escapism or information.
Escapism or information. Those
or
are the two.
Forcible.
Or forced escape or for information.
I would say, or just, joy of reading. It doesn't have to actually be escapism as much as it is just you enjoy reading, just like you enjoy watching The Office or something.
All right, why do you read?
I would say, for sure, information. I think that most of my reading now is to kind of keep me entertained on drives. Once again, Audible. I'm not holding a book up in front of my face as I drive, or for information, or just in the case of Scripture to learn more about Jesus.
All right, so that's another example you gave. What about, do you adhere to the notion that possibly reading is kind of like a whetstone for your mind, where like a whetstone is something that you use to sharpen like a knife? Would you say that reading is something that helps keep your mind sharp?
I think for sure, because there have actually been studies done that I cannot cite off the top of my head talking about, as you get older, something you can do to prevent Alzheimer's, or not necessarily Alzheimer's, but dementia specifically, is to continue to give your brain new experiences. And so, some people do that by being the old guy who has, a van and travels across the country or whatever. But another way you can do that.
10 cents a feel, man.
10
cents a feel. At one point in time, I forget where, I think I was in Indianapolis, there was this old dude that had like this Scooby-Doo van, but it was completely carpeted. And on the side of it, it said 10 cents a feel.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you can be that guy, or you can read, because it does, your brain layers through all of these different things, not exactly as if you're experiencing them, but you get the same kind of rewiring of your brain.
Over break, I actually watched Good Will Hunting again. And in Good Will Hunting, Will Hunting, the main character, has never left Boston, but he has read a lot. And so he is well-knowledge and well-versed in all these things, even though he's still never left outside of Southside. Well, I guess he's never left Boston itself.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what do people do when they read? So what are they actually doing when they're reading?
It depends on the person. I guess depending on what level of reading you're at, the person can either be just straight up getting kind of stuck on what are the two bottom ones? The graph.
Oh, yeah, so the graphonic or the syntactic, if it makes it a little better, structural or visual.
Yeah, so they're getting, caught up, and I'll see this a lot in class where the student they don't have experience. They're used to more visual mediums that are showing them things like pictures and video. And so they're not visualizing what they're seeing in their head. Correct. They're just, it's almost like reading in another language, where you're trying to grasp what it says instead of understanding, instead of visualizing it. So when I would read, say I read The Hobbit, and this is freshman year probably, I think I read The Hobbit of high school, and I would read that, and it was a movie. I forgot that I was looking at pages, and I would just be... You'd be
captured within the book.
I'd be seeing all of this stuff in my head, and then it'd be like, oh, where was I on that page? I have no idea. And then I have to kind of glance back over it, because I wasn't reading word by word. I was just going, and my brain was...
You got lost in the flow of the information that was coming over you.
Yeah.
So you're basically kind of saying that whenever the students that you see that are looking at the syntactic or graphophonic, the structural or visual level of reading and can't get past that, what are they not doing?
I mean, I guess they're not visualizing it, but they're struggling to grasp the information or struggling to grasp the idea.
Struggling to grasp the idea, I like that. Let's flip it around a little bit more. They are not necessarily that they're not visualizing something. They're not. What are they possibly not doing? They are not possibly putting together the information. They have the bricks, but what are they doing with the bricks?
They are stacking them.
To use the old Fridley-ism.
Yes, they are not building the house per se as much as they are stacking the bricks.
And sometimes you can have a student that is really good at stacking bricks and has a very nice pile of bricks.
Yes.
But can you really use that?
You can if all you do is fill in the blank.
Yes. Okay, what about and then you could have someone that has just a mess of bricks laying all around, correct? And then you have different structures, which is more beneficial to you: a pile of bricks or a structure, even though it might not be the soundest structure, a structure that can keep the monsoon from hitting you, like what is currently going on outside.
Yeah, gosh, it is flooding. Yeah, the structure is definitely more useful because then you begin to make ideas your own instead of just regurgitating. So now I think it was you that started saying that I don't want you to...
Oh, this is the paraphrase.
Yeah,
for the paraphrase, I don't want you to... you need to throw up the cupcake.
Yeah.
The original text is the cupcake. It looks nice and pretty and whatnot. And whenever you read it, you're eating a cupcake.
Oh, he's actually eating a cupcake. This is kind of gross.
I know. I brought a cupcake out. I'm sorry, you can't have them on cupcakes. But anyway, when you're eating a cupcake, you're doing the reading.
Why does the cupcake smell like dog food?
Well, I had to go. Right before we recorded this, I had to go run home to the dog. Anyway,
this is going to make me vomit.
Oh, exactly. And then whenever you're paraphrasing, you're throwing up the thing. Now you have a pile of
shoe.
I know you have a pile of vomit right there. Now the cupcake's still there, right?
I think chunks of it. It was a brown cupcake.
So yeah. So the cupcake is still there, but does it look exactly the way it was?
Oh no,
no. So it has became a part of you, and it is your version of it. It just doesn't look exactly the same. And so that's my disgusting paraphrasing example of what you need to do when you paraphrase.
We're now going to pause this recording while he scrubs the floor.
Imagine a technical difficulties thing.
Yeah.
All right, so you already kind of addressed this, but let's hit it one more time. What do you do inside your head when you read?
It depends on what I'm reading, but most of the time I am visualizing it. I'm almost. It's like I'm watching a movie projected on the front of my skull.
Okay. What I kind of do, it depends on what it is. If it's fiction, sometimes I will read it and that's the movie is going on. But if it's like informative, which a lot of this is what I'm having to do my last 6 months I've been alive. I've been reading a lot of informative text for my graduate classes. And what I do is I'm just kind of like pulling it out and I'm kind of keeping an eye, like in my head, I'm saying that's useful. Let's put it over here in my head, or I might need that later. I might put that over there. So I'm kind of just pulling information from the text that I can use. Mm-hmm. All right. So here comes the biggie. I have to ask you this 3 times.
Oh,
I had to be sure to ask all 3 questions. I'm not supposed to tell you this if you're the student, but as the teacher, I think
behind the scenes.
So when you're reading and you come to a word that you do not know, when you're reading and you come to a word that you do not know, what do you do?
When I come to a word that I do not know, it depends on how crucial of a spot it is in. I will either file it away into my mind and say I need to look that up later, or I will immediately look it up. It's not to... it's rare.
Right, so does this help?
Yeah. Looking it up usually helps because I'll then remember what it means next time.
All right, what else do you do when you come to a word that you do not know? So you look it up. What else?
I look it up. What else do I do?
Let's say you don't have a dictionary or the internet or anything around.
I attempt to figure it out.
How?
Looking at the text around it. If Jack and Jill ascended the hill and then an alien came down and blorfed Jack, then I have to figure out, what could aliens do to someone? Well, that could mean abducted. That could mean he disintegrated him into a puddle of goo, And so you kind of just look at what is around there and see what makes sense based on where the story is going and what is being said.
what else do you do if you were reading by yourself with no one to help you and you didn't have a dictionary and the context did not help you out? What do you do then?
Oh, are you looking for breaking down the word?
I don't know. I had to ask you this 3 times.
Okay, well, that was through number 3, right? I guess this is actually really step 1 to try and understand it. I just don't think about it, because if I say I don't know what the word means, then I assume I've already attempted this step. But that would be looking at the word and seeing if I can break it down and affiliate it with other words. So if I, see something that says polyphonic, and I'm like, okay, well, poly, that could be a bird that wants a cracker, or it could mean multiple, and then phonic, I know that, phonics means sound, so polyphonic means it has multiple sounds.
And you hit right on what I was looking for. I was word-based strategies, meaning-based strategies, and then assistance-based strategies. You covered the first 2, and, I guess that's what they want. I don't know. This is the first time. And if this is another teacher that, somehow stumbled upon this because it's titled, reader interview, whatnot, keep in mind, this is my first time doing this, so I apologize if I'm being too forward with the questioning or whatnot. This is my gimme rep.
Yeah, this is 2 teachers trying to figure out
how to do this.
How this is done.
All right, so do you know anyone in your class besides your teacher who is a good reader?
Yes, but I'm not allowed to name them because FERPA.
Okay, so you can't answer to who. So what do you think this person does when he or she comes to a word that they don't know?
Well, seeing that actually I'm the teacher, often they'll ask me.
All right, so they'll ask you. All right, do you like to read in order to find out things about things that you're interested in?
For sure.
What do you like to read about? This is starting to get redundant.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a tad redundant, but
we're almost there. We got about 4 more questions.
Jesus stuff, history stuff, and every now and then just random current events-y stuff, as in reading about how Bezos got his empire and how he will lose it soon, or at half of it. Anyway, so so
you gotta get that prenup. All right, how do you feel about your reading assignments?
How do I feel about
in school?
I would say, am I answering this as
homework?
Someone in school, or as the assignments that I assigned to be?
Both. Let's do both.
Okay, so what's the term? Spill the tea about being a teacher. So the reading assignments that I received, it depended on the class, right? So I'm thinking college here. Well, high school too. It just depended on what kind of thing it was. Some of them I really enjoyed. Some of them I dreaded and then ended up really enjoying. I've actually mentioned to you before the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and then The Importance of Being Earnest, 2 things that I did not expect to like because they are more like plays. And then I read them and I actually thought they were really funny. I was amused by both of those things. And so sometimes I like them, and then sometimes the ones that I am assigned, Spark Notes. It's I just don't really have an interest. I am simply trying to gather information out of them, and that's the extent of it. As far as things that I do assign, most of the reading that I assign to my government class, well, I made them read the entire Constitution and count all the words. You're welcome.
Just as a teacher of reading, how is that beneficial?
Okay, so it's not for reading purposes. It was actually for the purpose of, we were talking about the big ideas in the Constitution, and then we looked at how many words were used for each. So in other words, they could look and see essentially that there are over 50% of the Constitution's words are spent on the legislative branch. And so they could actually look at the percentage of how much of the Constitution was each of these different ideas. And then they could take that and go, okay, well, which ones did the founders believe were most important? Which one did the founders believe would be most
Which
necessary?
ones did they burn a lot of energy on to make sure that that people knew about them?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Let's see. How do you feel about yourself as a reader in general?
I think I'm a good reader. And I think that I probably could be a more diverse reader, but that's about it.
What do you do well as a reader? What is your strongest point as a reader?
I think quick pulling of big ideas. Like, I think my strongest point is being able to glance through a page and get the general idea. Now,
grab onto that overarching theme that's kind of trying to talk about.
Yes, and this is one that Fridley was pretty good at catching me, but most teachers were not good at catching when I hadn't actually read the text when I was in school, because I could just skim it. Like, while they're saying, "All right, class, now we are going to be," I'm skimming the page, and then, I could say I read it. So I would say that's a strong suit, but it can also be a problem.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, you start relying on that, and then you don't really get the meaning of a text, and you think you do because you skimmed it.
What would you like to do better as a reader, if anything?
Do better as a reader. I think getting back in the day, I used to sit there for hours and read, and I have been I think I've got a little, well, my students would say for sure, have a little bit of ADHD brain, and so that has been supplemented by the Twitter and Facebook loop on my phone, and so now just the focus of sitting there and reading and not thinking about other stuff, just sitting there and reading.
We've talked about this before. In fact, it's a common thing we used to talk about before we had a podcast about like how social media and technology has kind of like ate into our ability to actually do deeper thinking. We could talk more about that later in another episode. So the next part of this, after I get done with the initial interview, is I'm supposed to have you read 2 of 3 things. So I actually have 3 things here. And the purpose of this is I'm going to be following along as you read. Now, if I would, I'd have a pencil and I'd be marking
copyright.
I'd be marking. No, we're within fair use because we are only using 500 words.
Okay.
And so I would mark like the errors that you would have, your self corrections, the words that you would replace it with, that type of stuff. If I had a pencil, I'd be doing that. And through that, I would be seeing how you go about making meaning. See if your errors are deal with meaning making sense. If they're structure, choosing the words that sound right, or if they're visual, checking to see what word looks right. So we don't have to read all 3. We're just going to read 2. And so you're supposed to start off with the medium one, and then determining on how they did will either go up or down. So you're supposed to have kind of like a stratus of like lower level, middle level, higher level.
Okay.
And so that's what we're going to do. So I decided that the middle level is going to be something that I read with my sophomores. And so that's the first one that you're going to read. Yeah, so this is actually the next thing that we're going to read in class. All right, so Mr. Norman, whenever you're ready, you may take it over.
Part 1, The Hearth and the Salamander. Okay, I'm going to stop doing my audible voice.
Audible hopes you enjoyed this program.
It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed, with the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. The blood pounded in its head, and its hands were shaking because of some of the amazing... Oh, see, I added a the.
Yep.
The hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house... Oh, I know what this is from now. I should have gotten this earlier. And the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted, above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping, pigeon-winged books died on the porch and the lawn of the house. While the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Montag grinned the fierce grin of all the men, singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man, burnt corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile still gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never went away. Never ever went away. As long as he remembered. He hung back with his black beetle-colored helmet and shined it, and he hung his flame-proof jacket neatly. He showered luxuriously, then whistling, hands in pockets, walked across the upper floor of the fire station and fell down the hole. At the last moment, when disaster seemed positive, he pulled his hands from his pockets and broke the fall by grasping the golden pole. He slid to a squeaking halt, heels 1 inch from the concrete floor downstairs. He walked out of the fire station, along the midnight street, towards the subway, where the silent air-propelled train slid soundlessly down its lubricated flue in the earth, and let him out with a great puff of warm air under the cream-tiled escalator rising to the suburb. Whistling, he let the escalator waft him into the still night air. He walked towards the comer, thinking, the comer? That's the corner, but it says comer.
Mine says corner.
He walked
around the corner. Okay. That's just an error of how this was made. All right, continue. Good job, you spotted it.
I was like, is this a test? He walked towards the corner, misspelled comer, and thinking little at all about nothing in particular. Before he reached the corner, however, he slowed as if wind had sprung up from nowhere, as if something had called his name.
All right. That's enough for this one.
Okay, good.
All right. So traditionally what we would do then is I would talk to you about, like, different things. I would test you for comprehension. I would ask you things about, like, what did you think about this piece? And that type of stuff. But for time constraints, we're going to leave that out, and we'll move on to the next one. By the way, a lot of, like, from what I've read so far, I'm still trying to grok it all myself, but a lot of times omission goes to visual, checking to see if the word looks right, and if you leave something out, you're just in your head being like, that's not necessary, or if even time you insert a word that's for, like, a visual, like, I'm trying to make it make sense in my own ways of viewing it. All right, so let's see. Let's go with the easier one just to wrap it up and to have a connection to another podcast of ours. All right. Are you ready?
Yes. All right. The villager, or chapter 1, the Riddle House. Oh, hey, shout out to the riddles. The villagers of Little Hangleron still called it the Riddle House. Even though it had been many years since the Riddle family had lived there, it stood on a hill overlooking... Oh. Yep. I think I know what this is.
Keep going.
It stood on a hill overlooking a village, some of its windows boarded, tiles missing from its roof, and ivy spreading unchecked over its face. Once a fine-looking manor, and easily the largest and grandest building for miles around, the Riddle House was now damp, derelict, and unoccupied. The little Haggletons had all agreed that the house was creepy. The old house was creepy. Half a century ago, something strange and horrible had happened there, something that the older inhabitants of the village still liked to discuss when topics for gossip were scarce. The story had been picked over so many times, that it had been embroidered in so many places, that nobody was quite sure what the truth was anymore. Every version of the tale, however, started in the same place. 50 years ago, at the daybreak on a fine summer's morning when the Riddle House had still been, well, kept and impressive, a maid had entered the drawing room to find all 3 riddles dead. The maid had run screaming down the hill into the village, roused as many people as she could, lying there with their eyes wide open, cold as ice, still in their dinner things. The police were summoned, and little Hangleton had seethed with shocked curiosity and ill-disguised excitement. Nobody wasted their breath pretending to feel very sad about the riddles, for they had been most unpopular. Elderly Mr. and Mrs. Riddle had been rich, snobbish, and rude, and their grown-up son, Tom, had been, if anything, worse. All the villagers cared about was the identity of their murderer. For plainly, 3 apparently healthy people did not all drop dead of natural causes on the same night. I can tell you why.
All right. That will be good. So, what was that one from?
Harry Potter.
That was Harry Potter. That was from my favorite of the Harry Potter books. What was the first book from?
The first one was from Fahrenheit 451.
There you go. I finally got you to read Fahrenheit 451.
Yep, that's all I've read of it, though.
All right. So, but as mentioned before, after that I would ask questions about comprehension. Just in general, what did you think about the 2 pieces?
Definitely, Harry Potter was an easier read. It just flowed smoother. It was it felt like, just from my analysis, it was trying less hard to be artsy. Like, I feel like Fahrenheit 451 was trying to build dramatic tension and do that by having kind of awkward phrasing and broken sentencing, and by doing that, it made it harder to read.
And there's a reason, like the deeper you get into it, it explores the reason behind that for a reason, because it is awkward sentencing because the person that is doing the thinking in that particular portion of the book has not actually read or have actually really thought before, and so he's still struggling to get his thoughts out in a coherent way.
I see.
All right. But yes, so there we go. That does it for this episode, I imagine. Thank you, Mr. Norman, for helping me with my homework.
Now I just have to ask, did I pass?
Yes, everybody passes this. It's not a pass or fail type of thing. It's just a conversation. That's all this is. It's a conversation. There's no pass, there's no fail. All right, but until next time, my name's been Paul Davidson.
And my name is and will be Scott Norman.
And this has been Two
Dumb White Guys.